Today, you can find McDonald's almost everywhere, in huge cities, on highways, inside airports, near schools, and sometimes in places where you would never expect to see a restaurant at all. The golden arches have become one of the most recognizable symbols on Earth. But the story of McDonald's did not begin with a billion-dollar corporation. It began with two brothers, a small restaurant in California, and a simple idea: serve people quickly, make the food affordable, and make every burger exactly the same. That idea would eventually change the entire restaurant industry. But there is something strange about the story of McDonald's. The men who created the system were not the men who built the global empire. The brothers who invented the revolutionary restaurant concept eventually sold it. And the man who saw its true potential was a 52-year-old salesman who had spent decades trying to make his own fortune. His name was Ray Kroc. What happened between these three men would transform a small California hamburger restaurant into one of the most powerful brands in the world. And it would also create one of the most famous business stories in American history. This is the history of McDonald's. To understand McDonald's, you have to go back to California in the 1940s. Richard and Maurice McDonald, usually called Dick and Mac, had moved west from New England looking for opportunities. Their first ambitions were not about hamburgers. The brothers were interested in the entertainment industry and tried their luck in Hollywood, but Hollywood did not make them rich. Instead, they discovered something much more practical: restaurants. In 1940, the brothers opened a drive-in restaurant in San Bernardino, California. At the time, American drive-in restaurants were very different from the McDonald's we know today. Customers parked their cars, waitresses, often called car hops, brought food directly to them. The menu was large, the service was slow, and restaurants depended heavily on having lots of employees. The McDonald brothers initially followed this model, but eventually they realized something important. Their customers did not necessarily want dozens of choices. They wanted food that was cheap, good, and fast. So in 1948, the brothers made a radical decision. They closed their restaurant, and they redesigned the entire business according to McDonald's own history. They introduced what became known as the Speedee service system, a streamlined method built around speed, consistency, and a limited menu. The transformation was dramatic. Instead of trying to serve everything, they focused on a few products: hamburgers, fries, milkshakes. The hamburger was inexpensive, and the kitchen was designed almost like an assembly line. Each employee had a specific job. One person prepared the meat, another prepared the buns, another handled the fries. Everything was measured. Everything was standardized. The goal was simple: make food quickly, make it affordable, and make sure the customer gets almost exactly the same experience every time. It sounds obvious today, but at the time, it was revolutionary. The brothers had essentially turned a restaurant kitchen into a production system, and that system would become the foundation of the fast food industry. The McDonald brothers had created something much bigger than a hamburger restaurant. They had created a system, and that distinction would eventually make the business worth millions. Imagine walking into a restaurant in 1948, you order a hamburger, you expect to wait instead. Your food appears almost immediately. There is no complicated menu, no long conversation with a waitress, no waiting around. The restaurant is built around one thing: efficiency. The brothers also designed their buildings to attract attention. Their famous red and white restaurant design featured two large arches. These arches were eventually transformed into the golden arches that became the symbol of McDonald's. But there was still a problem. The brothers had built an incredible restaurant. They had not yet figured out how to turn it into a massive national business. They experimented with franchising. Several locations opened under their system. But the brothers were relatively conservative. They wanted a successful business. They did not necessarily want to conquer the entire country. And that is where the story takes a dramatic turn. Because thousands of miles away, another businessman was looking for an opportunity. His name was Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc was not a young entrepreneur. He was already in his 50s, and his career had been anything but ordinary. He had worked as a musician. He had sold paper cups, and eventually, he became a salesman for a company that produced a machine called the multi-mixer. The machine could make several milkshakes at once. And in 1954, Kroc noticed something strange. A small restaurant in San Bernardino had ordered an unusually large number of his machines. Most restaurants needed one, maybe two. This restaurant had ordered several. Kroc became curious. Why would a small hamburger restaurant need so many milkshake machines? So he traveled to California to see it for himself. And when he arrived, he saw something he had never seen before. Customers were everywhere. The restaurant was small. The menu was simple, but the operation was incredibly efficient. People ordered, they paid, they received their food, and they left. There was almost no wasted movement. Kroc immediately understood what he was looking at. The brothers had not simply created a successful restaurant. They had created a machine for producing successful restaurants, and Kroc saw something else. Scale. If this system worked in San Bernardino, why couldn't it work in Chicago, New York, Texas? Eventually, the entire world? McDonald's records say Kroc became the brothers' franchise agent in 1954 after seeing the potential of their operation. The brothers had found a salesman, but Kroc believed he had found something much bigger. Kroc convinced the McDonald brothers to let him help expand their concept through franchising. But this was not going to be easy. Kroc opened his first McDonald's restaurant in Des Plaines, Illinois, in 1955. He was 52 years old. Most people at that age were thinking about retirement. Kroc was thinking about building 1,000 restaurants. His strategy was different from the brothers. He wanted aggressive expansion, but he also understood something critical. If every franchise owner changed the menu, changed the kitchen, changed the ingredients, or changed the way the restaurant looked, the McDonald's system would fall apart. So consistency became everything. The restaurant had to work like a machine. Same basic products, same procedures, same standards, same experience. That was the real product, not the hamburger, the system, and Kroc became obsessed with it. He wanted franchise owners to follow the formula, because if the formula worked in Illinois, it could work in California. And if it worked in California, it could work anywhere. By 1960, Kroc had helped build a rapidly expanding network of McDonald's restaurants across the United States. McDonald's says its 1,000 restaurant vision was originally focused on the United States alone. But there was a problem. Kroc and the McDonald brothers did not see the future the same way. The brothers wanted control. Kroc wanted growth. And those two philosophies were eventually going to collide. Dick and Mac McDonald had created the system. They knew what worked, and they were cautious about changing it. Kroc was different. He was constantly looking for ways to expand. He wanted more restaurants, more franchisees, more customers, more revenue, and more control. The relationship became increasingly difficult. Kroc believed the business could become enormous. The brothers were more conservative to Kroc. Every limitation was a problem to the brothers. Every limitation was protection. This was no longer simply a disagreement about hamburgers. It was a disagreement about the future of the company. And eventually, Kroc reached a conclusion. If he wanted to build the McDonald's he imagined, he needed control. In 1961, the conflict reached its climax. Ray Kroc bought the McDonald brothers' business rights for $2.7 million. McDonald's corporate history identifies the figure as $2. $7 million. At the time, it was an enormous amount of money. But Kroc believed the opportunity was worth it. The brothers were no longer controlling the future of McDonald's. Kroc was dot, and now he could build the company exactly the way he wanted. There is an important detail here. The brothers did not walk away with nothing. They had already created a successful restaurant system. They had made money. They had opened the door to the entire idea, but they did not retain control of the empire their invention would eventually become. And that is what makes the story so fascinating. The name belonged to the brothers. The system belonged to the brothers. The original restaurant belonged to the brothers. But the vision of turning it into a massive national corporation belonged to Kroc, and Kroc was only getting started. After gaining control, Kroc focused on something that most customers never think about: real estate. Where should the restaurants be built? Who should own the land? How should franchisees operate? How could McDonald's make money even beyond selling hamburgers? This became one of the most important parts of the McDonald's business model. The restaurant itself was only one piece of the machine. The franchise system created a network of independent operators. The company could expand without personally operating every restaurant, and standardization meant customers could recognize the experience almost immediately. The golden arches became increasingly powerful. The restaurant became familiar. The menu became familiar. The packaging became familiar. The colors became familiar. The entire experience became familiar. That familiarity was incredibly valuable because once customers knew what to expect, McDonald's could take the same system to another city, then another state, then another country. The 1960s changed everything. McDonald's continued expanding across America. Then came the international markets. In 1967, McDonald's opened restaurants in Canada and Puerto Rico, beginning its international expansion. The company was no longer simply an American restaurant chain. It was becoming a global brand, and the company kept creating symbols that would become part of popular culture. The golden arches became an official logo in the early 1960s. Ronald McDonald became a major advertising character. And in 1968, another product arrived, the Big Mac 2. Beef patties, cheese, lettuce, sauce, pickles, onions, a sesame seed bun. It was not the first hamburger. It was not necessarily the most complicated hamburger, but it became one of the most recognizable sandwiches in the world. And McDonald's was no longer selling just food. It was selling familiarity. This is where McDonald's became something much bigger than a restaurant. Think about what happens when you enter a McDonald's in a completely unfamiliar city. You may not speak the language. You may not know the local restaurants. You may not understand the local menu, but you see the golden arches, and immediately you know what they mean. That is the power of a standardized global brand. McDonald's built its reputation around consistency. Quality, service, cleanliness, value. These principles became central to the company's operating philosophy, and the company kept expanding. More restaurants meant more visibility. More visibility meant more customers. More customers attracted more franchisees. More franchisees created more restaurants. The cycle continued. It was a business model capable of feeding its own growth. And this is exactly what Ray Kroc had seen when he first walked into that tiny restaurant in San Bernardino. But what happened? To Dick and Mac McDonald, their story is one of the most unusual parts of the entire history. They created the system that made McDonald's possible. They developed the Speedee service system. They pioneered the assembly line approach to fast food. They helped create the model that would eventually be copied by countless restaurant chains. But they were not the ones who turned it into a global empire. That was Ray Kroc. And this is where the story becomes more complicated. Was Kroc the man who stole their idea? Or was he the businessman who understood what their idea could become? The answer depends on how you look at it. Without the McDonald brothers, there would be no McDonald's system. Without Ray Kroc, that system might never have become a worldwide empire. The brothers invented the engine. Kroc built the highway by the late 20th century. McDonald's had become a cultural phenomenon. The company had expanded far beyond the small restaurant the brothers had created in California. It had become a symbol of American business, a symbol of fast food, and eventually, a symbol recognized around the world. McDonald's entered new markets. It adapted its menu. It changed certain products to fit local tastes, but the basic idea remained the same. Fast service, recognizable food, standardized operations, a familiar brand. The exact formula that had worked in San Bernardino decades earlier was now operating on a global scale. And Ray Kroc lived long enough to see the company become enormous. He died in 1984, but his business model continued. expanding after his death, there is a lesson hidden inside the McDonald's story, and it has almost nothing to do with hamburgers. The McDonald brothers thought they had created a great restaurant. Ray Kroc realized they had created a scalable system. That difference changed everything. A restaurant can become successful, but a system can be replicated and replicated again and again and again. The brothers focused on making the restaurant work. Kroc focused on making the model work everywhere. That is why McDonald's became so powerful. The most valuable thing they created was not the Big Mac. It was not the fries. It was not even the golden arches. It was the system behind them. And perhaps the most ironic part of the entire story is that the brothers who created that system eventually gave up control of it. Their decision made them wealthy. But it also meant they would never control the empire their invention would become. Today, McDonald's has grown from a small California restaurant into a global network with tens of thousands of locations across more than 100 countries. But every time you see those golden arches, remember where the story actually began. Not with a giant corporation, not with billions of dollars, not with a global marketing machine. It began with two brothers who looked at a slow restaurant and asked a simple question. What if we could make it faster? They simplified the menu. They reorganized the kitchen. They created an assembly line for food, and they accidentally invented one of the most influential business systems of the 20th century. Then a 52-year-old salesman walked into their restaurant. He saw something they hadn't fully recognized. Potential. He saw thousands of restaurants, then millions of customers, then a global empire. The brothers created McDonald's. Ray Kroc created the McDonald's we know today. And that is why the story of McDonald's is not really a story about hamburgers. It is a story about an idea that was simple enough to copy, powerful enough to scale, profitable enough to change the world. The next time you see the golden arches, remember that behind that simple logo is one of the greatest business transformations in modern history. Two brothers built the system. One salesman saw the future, and together, intentionally or not, they created the empire of fast food.